Dear students, in this module we will discuss and understand about the essential aspects of hypothesis, by which you will be able to be aware of the need and how to formulate the hypothesis in research. Keeping this in mind, this module aimed with the following learning objectives: definition, meaning and importance of hypothesis, need for hypothesis, characteristics and functions of hypothesis, types and sources of hypothesis, formulation of hypothesis and difficulties in doing so, and finally utilities of hypothesis. Firstly, we will learn about hypothesis meaning and its importance. In social science research, especially if it is quantitative in nature, hypotheses play a crucial role in carrying out research studies in a fruitful manner. In fact, in most social sciences, a lot of efforts are taken towards making hypotheses rather than testing them. In general, hypotheses are tentative propositions relating to investigate questions. We formulate them so that they can be tested in our research process. They either describe the properties of variables or show the relationships between them. They aim at answering research questions. They determine what facts will be sought and what research procedures will be used. Keen observation, creating thinking, hunch, wit, imagination, vision, insight and sound judgment are important in setting up researchable hypotheses. For better understanding of hypothesis, it is better to understand the following definitions at first. First and foremost one, they say Lundberg defines hypothesis as a tentative generalization, the validity of which remains to be tested. In its most elementary shape, the hypothesis may be every hunch, guess, imaginative data which becomes the basis for action or investigation. Another researchers by name Black and Champion define a hypothesis as a tentative statement about something. The validity is usually unknown. Bailey defines hypothesis as a proposition that is stated in a testable form and that predicts a particular relationship between two or more variables. In other words, if we think that a relationship exists, we first state it as a hypothesis and then test the hypothesis in the field. According to Grinnell, a hypothesis is written in such a way that it can be proven or disproven by valid and reliable data. It is in order to obtain these data that we perform our study. Keeping all these definitions in consideration, it is clear that a hypothesis will have the following features. Firstly, it is a tentative statement. Secondly, its validity is unknown, and finally, in most cases, it specifies a relationship between two or more variables. Now, we will move on to characteristics of hypothesis. According to Kothari, hypothesis should possess some of the following characteristics. Hypothesis should be clear and precise. Hypothesis should be capable of being tested. Hypothesis should state the relationship between variables. It also should be limited in scope and must be specific. Hypothesis should be stated in simple terms so that the same is easily understandable by all concerned. Hypothesis should be consistent with most known facts. Hypothesis should be amenable to be tested within a reasonable time. Hypothesis must explain the fact that gave rise to the need for explanation. Now, we will move upon to functions of hypothesis. The primary function of the hypothesis is to give a definite point to begin the investigation and to guide the direction of the study. It specifies the sources of data, what data shall be studied and what content will be studied. It suggests which type of research is likely to be most appropriate for the study. and it also suggests the most appropriate technique of analysis. It contributes to the testing and formulation and development of theories. It describes and explains social phenomena which may be at times new or partly unknown. Coming to the need for hypothesis in social science research, generally in the social sciences, research primarily focused discovering useful facts so as to organize them in a logical manner, describe them and present them in some pre-organized manner wherein one can proceed without hypothesis. But in the recent past, social science research is mostly hypothesis driven. In qualitative research, the researcher emphasizes more on exploring, understanding and describing social phenomena rather than formulating and testing hypotheses. However, most research in the recent past focuses on collecting primary data from the natural setting with the help of a sophisticated theoretical background, in which case hypothesis plays an important role. Likewise, the majority of the studies in certain disciplines like sociology, economics, psychology, social work as well as in population studies depends upon the application of hypothesis and tries to examine the cause and effect relationship where the need of hypothesis has become crucial. For better understanding of hypothesis, we will move upon to types of a hypothesis. Strictly speaking, there should be only one type of hypothesis, that is the research hypothesis, which is the basis for investigation. However, in view of conventions followed in scientific inquiry, hypotheses have been classified into several types, of which a few are provided here. Research hypothesis, relational hypothesis, null hypothesis and working hypothesis. We will discuss a few words about each of these. First of all, first one is research hypothesis. These are tentative statements which describes the existence of some relationship between two or more variables. These are also named as descriptive hypothesis. Example, there exists significant relationship between level of education of women and their age at marriage. Example 2, differentials exist in age at marriage of women across their level of education. Likewise, example 3, age at marriage of women is associated with socio-cultural variables such as religion, caste, type of family, consanguinity, sibling position, age difference between bride and groom, type of marriage, horoscope matching and payment of dowry. The second type of hypothesis is relational hypothesis. These are propositions which describe the relationship between two variables. The relationship suggested may be positive or negative correlation or causal relationship. Strictly speaking, these are also research hypotheses and are also known as explanatory hypothesis. Generally, the first variable cited in the hypothesis is the independent variable and the next one is the dependent variable. For example, there exists a significant positive relationship between the level of education and level of education of women and the age at marriage. Likewise, the second one, the higher the level of education of women, the higher would be the age at marriage. Thirdly, women who are from a lower social standing, that is caste, joint family, marrying close blood relatives, born first among the siblings, entered into arranged marriage and practicing horoscope matching have a tendency to marry at early age than their respective counterparts. Third type of hypothesis are null hypothesis. These are hypothetical statements denying which is explicitly indicated in working hypothesis. They do not nor were ever intended to exist in reality. The objective of these hypotheses is to avoid the personal bias of the researcher in the matter of collection of data. Null hypotheses are mostly formulated or stated at the time of testing of hypothesis with the statistical tests of significance. They conform to the qualities of detachment and objectivity to be possessed by a researcher. However, in some social science disciplines, these types of hypotheses used to be stated in the beginning of the research study itself. For example, there is no relationship between the level of education of women and their age at marriage. Likewise, in example 2, age at marriage of women does not vary across their religions, caste background, type of family, consanguinity, sibling position, age difference between bride and groom, type of marriage, horoscope matching, and payment of dowry. The fourth type of hypothesis are working hypotheses. These are tentative propositions to be formed while planning the research study related to a problem. In the initial stages of research, the researchers may not be very specific about the types of relationship between different independent and dependent variables. In such cases, they are referred as working hypotheses, which are subject to modification as the investigation proceeds. For example, the level of education of women may have an influence on their age at marriage. Secondly, different socio-economic factors such as religion, caste background, type of family, consanguinity, sibling position, age difference between bride and groom, type of marriage, horoscope matching, and payment of dowry are likely to be associated with age at marriage of women. So, here have an influence and likely to be associated deals with there is no specific direction in hypothesis. That is why they are called as working hypothesis. Now, we will discuss a few words about sources of hypothesis. Researchers make use of different sources for formulating or framing of hypothesis so as to plan and carry out their research in a successful manner. Some of the principal sources for hypothesis are provided here. They are theory, analogies, personal experience, findings of earlier studies, cultural environment, personal imagination and thinking. We will discuss briefly about these one by one. Firstly, the theory. Scientific theories as a body of knowledge are fertile sources of hypothesis. The theory which is used by the researchers may satisfy the needs of adopting it, since they explain the known facts and they have been already observed and tested at different settings. In fact, hypothesis is the backbone of all scientific theory construction in some of the social sciences. Without it, confirmation or rejection of theories would be impossible. Secondly, analogies. Observation of similarity between two phenomena may be a source of formation of hypothesis aimed at testing similarity in any other aspect. In the words of Julian Huxley, causal observation in nature or in the framework of another science may be a fertile source of hypothesis. The success of a system in one discipline can be used in the other discipline also. When the hypothesis was born out of social observation, the same term was taken into sociology. It has become an important idea in sociological theory. At the time of formulation of hypothesis, it is generally satisfactory when it has some structural analogies to other well established theories. Formulation of an analogous hypothesis is construed as an achievement because by doing so its interpretation is made easy. Next one is about personal experience. On the basis of personal experience, the researcher uses his or her mind and suggests some points towards the topic of study by developing good hypothesis. It is obvious to state that more research experience leads to higher degree of information and greater ability to precisely formulate hypotheses. Most scientific inventions are based on personal experiences only. Next source of hypothesis are findings of earlier studies. Findings of earlier research studies on the one side provide information regarding under what circumstances a particular hypothesis has been proved or disproved, and On the other side, such findings also suggest or lead to the formulation of more hypotheses which need to be tested in the future under similar or different conditions. Such findings will lead to the continuity of research in the same field of specialization, which in turn would be helpful for modifying or adding to existing theory. Next source of hypothesis are cultural environment. Most social phenomena are affected by the cultural environment or setting where human beings live. The cultural fabric includes a variety of religions, caste, traditions, norms, family systems and values of particular setting, and further such cultural aspects vary across time and place. Therefore, one should link the hypothesis to the cultural setting under which the total phenomena is studied. Next comes the personal imagination and thinking. It is well known fact that a good researcher possesses the qualities of creative thinking and imagination from which crucial hypotheses tend to arise. Such qualities of researchers lead to greater number of hypotheses being formulated, and it also facilitates control over his problem under study. Now, we will move upon to the characteristics of a good hypothesis. Among the major characteristics, number 1, it should be simple and easy to understand. Hypothesis should have conceptual clarity both formally as well as operationally. It should be specific in nature about the preconditions concerned with it in the process of investigation. Hypothesis should be testable, capable of verification with empirical data. Availability of relevant techniques should be there for testing hypothesis. Hypothesis should have the basic quality of theoretical relevance. Hypothesis should be consistent with a body of established facts. Hypothesis should be objective in nature while formulating and testing with empirical data. Now, we will move upon to formulation of hypothesis. Formulation of a hypothesis is one of the basic needs in scientific research, which is a more difficult and crucial step. By and large, to formulate a good hypothesis, researchers need to adhere to the following steps besides understanding the characteristics of hypothesis. Firstly, the researcher should have a thorough knowledge about the problem under study. Such knowledge would be beneficial to the researchers to understand the intensity of the problem under investigation and to analyze clearly the factors affecting a social phenomenon and thereby formulate the hypothesis in a proper and precise manner. The researcher should be clear about the desired goal or solution, and accordingly the hypothesis would be formulated so as to collect suitable data. The researcher should make a real effort to look at the problem in new ways other than the regular practices, for which he or she should come out from conventional thinking. The researcher should always give importance to imagination and speculation so as to establish clear associations and relationships about various issues related to the problem under study, which in turn would be helpful to formulate good hypothesis. The researcher also should think of many alternative solutions for the same problem and decide which one would be more ideal way to proceed further. Further, the researcher also should thoroughly examine the conditions, context in which the problem exists and then state the hypothesis in an appropriate manner. Now, we will move upon to the difficulties in formulating hypothesis. There are several difficulties, of which a few are highlighted here. Firstly, lack of clear theoretical background and or options of theoretical framework. Lack of logical background and ability to utilize the theoretical background is another difficulty researchers face. Lack of knowledge about various scientific methods and tools to be applied in research is yet another difficulty in formulating research hypothesis. And now we will move upon how to eliminate or remove these difficulties in formulating hypothesis. For example, first one, complete and perfect knowledge of the principles of subject specialization has to be acquired. In the inception of research study, hypothesis should be brief and timely. It should grow as the research proceeds further, so that the hypothesis should be developed as elaborate, that is in detail, as one proceeds with the field of research. Now, we will finally move upon to the utility of hypothesis. The major utilities of hypothesis are: number 1, the hypothesis provides guidance to proceed on certain definite lines. Secondly, hypothesis helps in selecting pertinent factors. Thirdly, hypothesis helps in drawing specific conclusions. We will discuss a few words about each one of these. Firstly, the hypothesis provides guidance to proceed on certain definite lines. The hypothesis helps the researchers with regard to the direction in which he or she should proceed. It is commonly believed that in the absence of the hypothesis, it is as if the researcher is sailing on an uncharted vessel without compass or rudder. Secondly, hypothesis helps in selecting pertinent factors. For example, for the researcher comes to settle on a direction how to proceed in the research with the hypothesis. Through it, he or she able to collect all relevant factors likely to affect the phenomenon under consideration, and it is also possible to eliminate irrelevant facts. Thirdly, hypothesis helps in drawing specific conclusions. For example, if the researcher rightly draws the hypothesis and is able to formulate it scientifically, it helps him or her not to proceed in the right direction to carry out the research, but also helps him or her to draw conclusions precisely and logically. In this module, a detailed discussion is made about the various aspects related to hypothesis, like definition, meaning and importance of hypothesis, characteristics of and functions of hypothesis, types of hypothesis with suitable examples, formulation of hypothesis and difficulties, if any, faced while doing so, and finally utility of hypothesis. Dear students, hope after understanding all these aspects, your capabilities in formulation of suitable hypothesis for your research endeavors are likely to be improved upon. Thank you.